Congressman, thank you very much for joining us on Hard Knock TV. How are you doing today?
Hey, Nick.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. I'm doing well. How's everything?
Everything is good. Everything's good. Thank you for taking the time.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I'm sorry that I'm overdressed, but
No,
I had meetings and stuff.
I appreciate it. The last year and a half, we've got a chance to work a little bit as you and the Hispanic Caucus have made it a priority to really face the lack of representation that we have in Hollywood and in media. I wanted to start the conversation. Maybe you can tell us in your words why this has become a priority for you and the Hispanic Caucus.
Well, I was chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. My chairmanship just ended in January, and so I was chair for 2 years. And this issue of representation had always bothered me. The lack of Latina representation in Hollywood, both like the portrayal part and then also just the lack of numbers, at film studios, as people in front of the camera, behind the camera, all of it. But what really motivated me to put my foot on the gas was what happened in El Paso, Texas in August of 2019, where you had this madman drive 10 hours and kill 23 people because he considered them Hispanic invaders to Texas. And so at that point, we really worked on scheduling a trip to Los Angeles to meet with studio executives and others about this issue, about the fact that in terms of in front of and behind the camera, you only have like 4 or 5% of roles in both those places that go to Latinos and Latinas. And that in terms of portrayal, we're still, and we have been for a long time, like we're still portrayed by stereotype, whether it's a gangbanger or drug dealer, Latinas as hypersexual or as prostitutes, and so as criminals, and so that was kind of the genesis of why I took this issue on.
I know in your variety piece, you talked about Hollywood and the media really being the main crafters of ideology and the narratives. You called it a public health issue. Can you elaborate on that for people who might not necessarily make the connections between the roles that we're seeing on TV and the rise in hate crimes, the lack of empathy for kids being locked up in cages? How are all these subjects connected to each other?
Well, one of the things I said in that piece is that there's a dangerous connection right now, and there has been for the past few years, between politics and entertainment or media. Because in media, you still have Latinos that are stereotyped often, including as criminals, sometimes as invaders to the country. And then you have politicians who will take advantage of that and use that in their rhetoric by calling us criminals and rapists and murderers and everything else. And the reason that can be so damaging and so impactful to a community and how it can make you become a target of hate, as the Asian American community, the AAPI community is experiencing now, is because for Latinos, at least, there's this Latino narrative that's missing in this country. Like we've been excluded for the most part from American history textbooks. We've been excluded from a lot of state history textbooks, including in my home state of Texas. Not that there aren't any Latino figures in the state history textbooks that we study in schools, but for a population that's 40% of the state, we're certainly not covered, and our contributions are not covered the way that they should be. And so when you have that void of narrative, what gets filled in its place is all of that misinformation and that stereotyping. And that makes it very dangerous for a community. That can make you a target. And that's what happened in El Paso in 2019. And so, when I started this, like even some of the members of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus were kind of wondering, what role do we have in dealing with Hollywood? Like, making a fuss over which actors or actresses get some roles on a TV show. And it's not just that. I mean, it was just a matter of one industry and, who's going to play this character or whatever. Then even though it's important, I probably wouldn't have gotten involved. It's that Hollywood is still today even the main, narrative creating and image defying institution in American society. Although I would argue now, especially with all the disinformation out there, that tech, whether it's Facebook or other social media platforms, are not too far behind at this point. But Hollywood is still that main engine for creating a narrative or portrayal of a certain group of people. And so that's why it matters to everybody. So it's not just a matter of like, does not just important to Latinas who actresses who are trying to land certain roles. It's important to Latina who is, graduated from college and now she's trying to get a job as an accountant. It matters how those people in the room that she walks into to do the interview, who have never had experience with a Latino community before, how they see her because of the images and the stories that they have been fed through American media and through entertainment. And so that's why we took the issue on, because I actually think that this is an issue that's much broader than just, who's working in the entertainment industry. It's an issue that affects all of us who walk around with a Spanish surname or with brown skin, a Latino identity, in ways that I think sometimes we may not even be aware of.
I'm glad you brought that up, because sometimes when I talk to some of my friends who might not be Latino, they're like, well, why is this such a big priority to you? Is it just about certain roles? And one of the examples that I bring up to them is, if we walk down a street anywhere in the US and we ask people to name 3 Latino heroes or leaders in US history, I think you'd be hard pressed to have people name 3. Now, if you ask those same people to name 3 notorious or infamous Latino drug dealers, I would imagine that they'll probably have an easier time, because we do see the narcos and we see these types of shows perpetuating these images. And to me, as a Latino first generation immigrant, it's really frustrating that those are the eyes that people who don't interact with us view us through, because that is their limited experience that they have with our communities. And it's very frustrating, as someone who goes into studios to try to pitch something outside of the main narrative that they're pushing. And for the last 15 years to hear, oh, that's too niche, or we're not sure that there's a big enough audience for that, or we're not sure something like that is premium enough. It makes us question the value of our stories, because we keep seeing the same stories over and over again.
Well, and that's the thing, Nick, like they won't seem to give you a shot unless your story fits into the stereotype that they can sell or that they're used to selling, right? And so it's hard to get away from that, And I agree with you. In fact, I have a friend that's from San Antonio, and he's a diplomat. He works for the State Department. And he said that when he was overseas and people would ask him, they knew he was American, but they would ask him about his background. And he said, he told them he was Mexican American. And right away they mentioned narcos, that's what they've seen, right? Like Mexicans, narcos. And then when we met with the Association of American Publishers, because we were also not just doing Hollywood, but hard news, diversity, inclusion in hard news, and then also in publishing. And I had a meeting that I'll never forget with the Association of American Publishers. I asked one of the gentlemen who was the CEO of one of the major publishing companies in the country, I asked him if he could name 3 Latinos or Latinas that had made a significant impact in American history. And the guy thought about it for like 5 or 10 seconds. And he finally came back and said, no, I can't. And this is a man who's very, very smart, very ambitious, and most of all is presiding over a company that supplies textbooks to schools in a big way, and can't name like 3 people from a community that's almost 20% of the country now, and so that lack of narrative, to me, if I had to boil everything down to the biggest problem, is that there is a lack, the Latino narrative does not exist or hardly exists in the United States. In other words, as you mentioned with your example of going and walking down the street, people just don't know who you are. As a Latino, Latina, they don't know who from your community has contributed anything significantly to the prosperity of the country, to the country's success or its development. They don't associate Latinos with any particular period in American history, right? So they don't know quite where to place you, I think. And so you get left out of history. And there's also this kind of lack of valuation that occurs, right? Because none of your historical figures from your community are being written about. It's almost as if nobody from your community really has any value or lasting value. For example, in the way that of course, William Shakespeare is in the canon of literature in the United States. Everybody in school studies William Shakespeare. So there is a cultural value to that. Well, for most Latinos and Latinas, that's just not the case, whether it's in literature or just about any other field.
One of the things that you have done in the last year and a half is you actually sat down with Hollywood executives to, talk through how we got here and where we're going. What have been some of your takeaways from actually sitting next to, some of the studio executives when you present them with this information? What are the type of things that you're hearing from them?
Yeah, that's a great question, man. So we started in earnest. Our first meeting out there in LA was in November of 2019. And the Motion Picture Association actually helped us set up a bunch of the meetings. And so we met with like executives from 6 or 7 studios, and they were all very receptive in terms of listening. I think some of them, I think just about all of them acknowledged that there was a problem, but there's a long way from acknowledging there's a problem to actualizing a plan, to change things. And I would say that some are doing a lot better than others. None of them, absolutely none of those companies has enough Latinos, Latinas as executives in their companies that I think would be helpful in helping to generate Latino content. Not that they don't have any, but they don't have enough. And then they continued to talk about building a pipeline of talent, Latino talent, which is true. You could always use a more robust pipeline. But it's not just an issue of starting people at the beginning, which is what a pipeline is, right? There's already a lot of Latino talent out there that, as you mentioned, is going into rooms, if they can get into the rooms with studio executives to make their pitches, but they're already going and pitching things, and they're just not being bought. They're not being accepted. They're not being hired either as directors, or second unit directors or any of those things. So it's not just, hey, there's nobody there at the beginning. It's also, there is a group of people that are qualified. They're just not hiring them. So it's all of those challenges.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges that I face going into these meetings is that we don't have enough Latino showrunners too. And for those people who don't fully understand what a showrunner is, that's a person who takes, let's say I bring in a show to a network. They like the show, but they're going to pair it up with somebody who's more experienced in the industry. So I had a show that they were interested in, and they gave me a list of 10 showrunners that they wanted to kind of take the show to the next step. 9 out of 10 were older white men. For a show like the one that I was pitching that dealt with identity, to be Latino is to understand the nuance of what it's different. There's so many of us from different parts of Latin America. We need people in these positions who understand that. I'm not really sure how an older white man is going to know, the intricacies and the details of what that experience is like. So then our shows end up being stereotypes because they are referencing things that they're familiar with, which is what they've already seen on camera. I'm curious, when you've had these conversations with these executives, the numbers are out there. We're 1 in 4 moviegoers. So our money supports Hollywood, yet we're not seeing that support back. When you bring that type of information to an executive and you tell them that, we're 1 in 4 moviegoers, yet we're 5% of the roles, half of those roles, we come out as angry per the USC study. So when they're faced with those kind of informations, like what do they say as a response to that?
I mean, to be honest with you, man, nobody's had a really great counter argument. I think they acknowledge the Latino community. It's a big driver. Of course, during this pandemic, a lot of movie theaters have been closed, but has been a big driver for years now and over-indexed, right, on movie going and purchasing of movie tickets. But now I think on some of the streaming services, even over-indexing on the streaming services as well. Which is very much a part of the future, right? I mean, it's already here, but its share is going to grow even more. But that's the irony of this whole thing, right? Usually in a quote unquote free market system, whoever makes up the market share is who you usually try to cater to. And here, what's weird is that Latinos are buying, but they're not trying to include you in the product that they're selling very often. And so they're trying to get away with excluding you and still wanting you to buy, right? And then some of the, in private conversations here and there, people will kind of imply, well, listen, if you're still willing to buy and we're not including you, then you must be okay with it. Mm-hmm. So they're kind of putting the onus on the group to, I don't know what, to boycott, to make some kind of, mass social movement against Hollywood. In order for things to change, but really it shouldn't take that. You should be willing to reflect the audience that is sustaining your product, right? And I told them, every industry just about produces a product. The tobacco industry produces cigarettes, right? Whatever the industry is, it produces a product. And the product right now that Hollywood is producing is in many ways can be dangerous for Latinos because it's laden with stereotypes still. You know, in a nation where the Latino narrative, the positive narrative, is missing in a lot of different places.
Let's talk about accountability. We've heard a lot of talking points from Hollywood, from your meetings a year and a half ago. I mean, Netflix just released a report, a month ago, where we haven't seen almost any progress, especially on the Latino and Latina side of things, not only in front of the camera, but behind the camera. So we've had these conversations. We're not seeing the type of results that we would like from these conversations. How can Congress and how can the viewers hold these studios accountable?
Well, I do think, like, generally, the folks who are out there that care about this issue, they should speak up on social media in every way that they can, that this matters to them, because that will get the attention of studio executives. But in terms of what we're doing, our work was interrupted some because of the pandemic, obviously, and the immediacy of dealing with that. But for the last few months, we really have been back in earnest as we started a new Congress with a new president and so forth. So I'm approaching this, and in November of last year, we actually had the House Judiciary Committee had a hearing on this issue of diversity and inclusion in American media, specifically in Hollywood. So, so my plan is kind of multifold. First, we're going to keep the pressure on the studios and the streamers and everybody else, and working with them, privately, obviously, but then also calling people out when we need to. But what we want from them is transparency first. So Netflix was a great example of a company. The numbers are not great, but that's what you want to see. The first step is for a company to be transparent about where they are, right? So it's a very concerning sign when a company won't even be transparent, when they won't even show you the books, the numbers, right? Because then we don't know where we are. So transparency first, and then working with them, and also with all the wonderful different groups, whether it's L.I.M.A or the work that Brenda Castillo does, or Felix Sanchez, Monica over at Latinx House, and all of them, everybody that's doing incredible work, and many that have been doing it for years and years. But, get them to be transparent, and then work with them to develop a plan for progress and accountability, so that they're setting real goals for improvement. Otherwise, if they just acknowledge the problem, I mean, that's great, but it doesn't really tell us how you're going to change it. Because we could be sitting here in 10 years and things, you've gone from 4 or 5% to 6% or something, right? And so that's our goal, is to get transparency first, and then get them to commit to goals for improving, and then measuring those goals over time. And so that's what we've been working on. And I've told them, I've been very clear about this to the MPA, the Motion Picture Association, to the studios. I said, we're not going to let up. And this is only going to become a more, 360-degree effort around you. So I have been in deep conversations with state legislators around the country to look at the tax breaks that Hollywood gets. Just like tax breaks for other industries have been examined, the oil and gas industry, the tech industry. This is not an industry that should be exempt from a very close examination of how it's using taxpayer money in the case of incentives, or what it's doing for the American people, all segments of the American people, in the cases that taxes are being forgiven. In other words, they're not having to pay taxes. And so we're going to keep the pressure up on the regulatory front, on the legislative front, working with state legislators also, and to try to keep the pressure on them to change. And I also got to say, Nick, you could see that there was a real, obviously not just for this industry, for the country, a real reckoning after the murder of George Floyd, right? And issues around African Americans, but then larger than that, even in terms of all people of color, right? That the industry seemed to become especially conscious at that point, or maybe finally start to move on the things they already knew, but had been very slow to move on. So I feel like there has been some more progress over the past, several months.
The Black community, just like the Latino community and other marginalized communities, have as we talked about, been negatively represented in media for a long time. It seems like the Black community has found a way to have more representation in terms of, more movies, more TV, just more representation in general. What do you think we can learn from our Black brothers and sisters in terms of how to apply the pressure and how to really change, the narrative that we continuously see depicting our communities, which is not something that puts us in a very good light?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, it's been amazing and wonderful to see the blossoming of more opportunities, as particularly for Black creators in Hollywood, and to see those products, those things become successful, which is, I think, what would have happened if you'd give them a chance years ago, right? So in terms of what we can learn, I think, there was a pipeline that was built years ago that has really come into fruition now. The demands were consistent for years also, and obviously many years where they were being shut out as well. And to be clear, there's still many categories where they're still being shut out, right? But then the third thing is a kind of solidarity that I see in the African-American community, particularly among folks, producers, directors, and so forth, actors who have been successful and now have some leverage in the industry to make the issue of diversity a top priority. That becomes very important, and there have been wonderful voices of Latinos like America Ferrera, Eva Longoria, Edward James Olmos for years, and others who have pushed also for Latinos and Latinas. But then there are also folks, I can tell you early on, that we reached out to, people of very high esteem, Latinos of very high esteem in the industry, and we didn't hear back. I mean, we heard crickets. And these are folks that I'm confident that if they were committed to this issue, could make a real difference, and yet, don't seem to be especially concerned with helping to move things forward. And then, of course, you also have Afro-Latinos who, of course, fit in both quote unquote categories there, right? And some of whom are doing very well also.
Unity is one thing that I feel like we need to work on as a community. And, there's a wide diaspora of the Latin experience. And I think that's the one thing that we have to figure out, like, what is our commonality and how can we all support each other within our, our differences for being from different cultures, having different dialects, whatever it is that I think we're still trying to grapple with, because there are 60 million US Latinos. And that is a big number that should come with it, a power and a stronger voice. And I think we currently have, not only in Hollywood, but I think in elections and a few other places where we have the numbers. We just haven't had a chance really to make those numbers count in terms of power capital in Hollywood or in numbers. And I think part of that comes with, I think we have a lot we can learn from the Black community in terms of the way that celebrities, Black Twitter activists, leaders are all coming together to make this push so that it's heard as loud and as clearly as possible. Where our community, I feel like, I think some people have tried in the past, but I think there's some people have gotten disillusioned because you try to be that voice and then you don't feel supported by the community, and then you just feel like you're out there on your own. So I think we're in a tricky situation where people have put themselves out there and maybe not felt the support, and other people maybe have seen that and aren't as quick to jump out there because they don't feel like the rest of the community is supporting. So I think that's definitely an issue that needs to be talked upon our community so that we are able to all come together to have a unified front.
Well, and that's, and one of the things that I wanted to do in this effort, is to empower the Latino advocacy groups that are working in this space, because we're in Washington, right? And I want to leverage everything from the federal government to help be part of the change in this industry. So possible legislation, new regulations. We got the Government Accountability Office is doing a study on this issue of Latino diversity in Hollywood that should be out by the end of the year. We got a change in the apprenticeship rules that now includes the entertainment industry. So we're looking for ways from our perch, so to speak, in Washington. I say we, my staff and I, to be helpful. But I also want to try to be helpful to empower the people that are actually operating in this space to become more powerful and do a better job as well.
One thing that you brought up with that study that hopefully we'll get by the end of the year, do you see that as a potential to then have a Senate hearing like with Mark Zuckerberg or something where some of these executives have the potential to speak in front of the Senate and in front of the nation to actually be held accountable for some of these issues? Because it feels like, I got in media, 20 plus years ago because I felt like I wasn't being represented at that time. In the last 25 years, I haven't seen that much progress, and I appreciate all the people who have been working hard for it, but it feels like something has to push these executives. If they're not motivated by the fact that 1 in 4 of us are moviegoers, maybe they need to be motivated in other ways. And I think one of them is to actually have to answer some of these questions that we're talking about in front of Congress and in front of, the public.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I would like to see, we had a hearing in November, the pandemic was still going on, but ultimately I'd like to see a hearing, whether in the House or the Senate or both, that includes CEOs from the major studios and streaming companies to answer this question, and like you said, if you look at different industries that have been brought in front of committees in Washington, that's included the financial services industry, where Jamie Dimon was grilled a few times at least. The tech industry now, where Mark Zuckerberg has been multiple times, and also the heads of Twitter and Google and other companies. So I don't think Hollywood should be exempt. And I don't, there's a lot of talk about Hollywood being a liberal industry. And I don't agree with that either. I think the system first of all, there's some wonderful, very wonderful individuals, whether they're actors or directors or producers, who are very progressive and who contribute to progressive candidates or causes and and are great. As far as my politics are concerned, right? If you're conservative, then somebody who's conservative, they would say, well, I don't like that. But, but the system as a whole is really ironic, because the system as a whole is not very progressive at all. It's very exclusionary and, in fact, conservative and regressive. I mean, just consider the fact that Harvey Weinstein, when he was committing all these atrocious acts, was the toast of the town in Hollywood for 20 years. I mean, that's just a fact. And despite everything he was doing, and what gets me is, in addition to him being able to prosper like that in that industry, is that at the same time, you're shutting out all of these wonderful women, for example, who could be great directors or producers, and not giving them a chance. You can't, you got to take a look at a workplace like that, an industry like that. We're all fans of television shows and movies and cinema and all of it, but still, you can't give an industry a pass.
Speaking of not giving an industry a pass, one of the industries that I feel like within Hollywood that's not getting as much attention is the streaming side of things. I feel like, we're talking a lot about studio executives, the traditional studios, but Hollywood Diversity Report in 2018 to 2019 said that Latino shares of leading acting roles was 4%. That is even worse than the studios. And I feel like not enough people are talking about, whether it's a Netflix, Hulu's, Amazon's, YouTube's. I feel like there's a lot of digital companies or streaming companies that haven't even began to have these conversations. And maybe because the track record isn't as long as, let's say, some of these studio executives and their lack of representation, I think we definitely have to make a push with streamers, because that's where a lot of the new generations are consuming their content. And we need to make sure that, new generations aren't also being excluded the way that, past generations have been excluded from seeing themselves. On that front, have you been privy to conversations with the streamer side of the industry?
Yeah, absolutely. We've met with Netflix, Amazon. We met with everybody at Amazon, the head of Amazon Studios some months back. And I want to say maybe Hulu, the folks at Hulu. And we've had multiple meetings with Netflix, and we actually stay in touch with them regularly. And, we lauded them on them putting out their numbers and their study and so forth. And like we said, we wanted transparency to be the first part. You're right. I think these folks are the future. That industry, or that segment of the entertainment industry, is only going to continue to skyrocket, this on-demand segment. So yeah, so we absolutely have to keep the pressure on those folks as well. And really, Nick, like what I'm looking for is, and I've told a few of them this, when it comes to Latino representation and diversity, inclusion, all of it, I'm looking for one or two groups that are doing it well. And right now, nobody's really doing it that well. But there's some that look like they're committed to getting there, right? And Netflix is actually one of them that may actually get there in a few years, or could be 5 years, right? Or could be longer than that. But what we want to take is one or two that are doing it really well, and then use that model to try to impress upon the others what they should be doing. And so that's my goal, is to be able to work in earnest with one or two of these groups, whether it's streamers or the broadcasters or the cable folks. The challenge with the cable and the broadcasters is that industry is so well developed already. It's been around so long. Streaming is, it's been around 15 years or whatever it may be, but it's still kind of in its developmental stage, so to speak, in a way that broadcasting surely is way past that stage. So anyway, the long and short of it is, yeah, we want to be able to work with them, but also keep the pressure up on them.
You spoke in ways where you plan on keeping the pressure on them, whether it's through the tax incentives or potential hearings. For people who are watching this and are as passionate about this as we are, what do you think a person who's not in Congress can do to let their voice be heard and to, help us take the next step in terms of adequate representation?
Well, I mean, I would say for all the folks out there, that you have power as consumers in what you purchase and what you watch, what you subscribe to, and you also have power as constituents to let your legislators know at every level of government. Remember, Hollywood there's a federal tax code that they benefit from. There are even more often state tax codes in places like Georgia, New Mexico, California, and a handful of others that they really benefit from with tax production credits. To let your state legislators know and your members of Congress know that it's an issue that's important, that you're watching, because like I said, when we started this at the beginning, and I said, hey, I want to take on this issue. And, if there's some folks that are like, well, there's so many other things we could do, education, we do healthcare, we do this and that, which are obviously incredibly important issues for the Latino community. But I feel like this one, again, is the one that is an issue that kind of hangs over everything. This is about how you're seen when you walk through the world in America, right? That's what's at stake for, what we're talking about. And so I hope that folks will speak up and let their legislators know, but also let those private companies know that they care about this.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think the way that the narrative is shaped of our culture impacts everything. It impacts policy. It impacts how we're treated in an interview for our work. It has a way of finding a way to impact us in every aspect of our life. So that's why it's personally been, a big priority for me. And thank you to you and your staff, definitely for putting in the long hours to, see a way to bring in more access and more diverse stories that actually represent us as a people, so that we're not constantly seeing the same negative stereotypes perpetuated over and over. Thank you very much for your time. I truly appreciate it. And any last words?
No, I just want to say thank you, Nick, and thank you to L.I.M.A and the coalition, just for all the wonderful work that you're doing and for highlighting this issue. And I think that my sense is that the next few years will be a few years where we could see really meaningful change. If we're working together and kind of rowing in the same direction and plowing down some of these barriers. So thanks for this.
I'm looking forward to the first movie of the first Latino president in the U.S. Hopefully that's in our immediate future.
That'd be great.
Thank you very much for your time, Congressman.
Take care.
Take care.